Hello, 𝐂𝐍𝐶𝐄𝐑 teachers. My name is Teacher Sean, and I decided to make this video because I see a lot of people posting specifically in the Facebook group asking about how to get more parent feedback. Our incentive structure is now based on this, and I do very well at this. So I just decided to make a video to show you some of the things that I do, and hopefully they can help you to get some more feedback. Very quickly, I wanted to go and show this. So my current valid 5-star evaluations is at about 52%. I was on the old contract and I decided to sign the new contract in early January. And that's because once I went through and found out how many parent feedback evaluations that I was receiving, the new contract was more beneficial to me because it means that I'm making more money. Now, if you look, I am at 52%. This is probably not the highest of any 𝐂𝐶𝐄𝐑 teacher, but it's high enough to get me to a level 5 incentive. And my goal through this video after you watch it is for you to be able to implement some of the things that I do so that you can start to receive more 5-star feedback from your parents. I've divided this presentation into 3 different parts. So the first one, I'm going to talk about quality lessons. 𝐂𝐶𝐄𝐑 makes a curriculum for us, but we still need to do a small amount of planning for us to have a quality lesson for our students. So I decided to separate this and make that the first part, tell you what I do in a lesson. The second thing I do to get quality feedback is how I take notes and how I share those notes with the parents in the feedback report for the student. And then at the end, the third thing I'm going to talk about is what I actually write in the feedback, and I'm going to give you a little bit more information that might make you feel a little less intimidated about asking for feedback in every lesson, because many people tell me that when, I've read that many people who have regular students do not like to ask repeatedly for the feedback, and I can understand why that would be a little intimidating, because you're asking the parent for something and it might cause you a little anxiety because your pay is based on whether or not they leave you feedback and if you do good feedback, if it's good feedback or negative feedback. So hopefully after I talk about these 3 things, you can probably try to implement some of them and see if it works out for you. I really hope it can. So let's go ahead and get started. So what do I mean when I'm talking about delivering a quality lesson? 𝐂𝐶𝐄𝐑 makes these lesson plans for us. Their curriculum is already designed, but we do need to understand that we are teaching English, and there are going to be misconceptions, especially when students who are not native English speakers are learning a language that is very different than English. The way that we speak English, we don't have tones. There are many different things that can affect our lesson plan just because the student is speaking Chinese as their primary language, their first language. So one very important thing, which I think everybody knows about, is pacing. So whenever I talk about pacing, this is not a one-size-fits-all approach. We're teachers. Nothing is one-size-fits-all. So pacing could be slower or quicker depending on the student. If I have a student in K1 who can breeze through the materials, I'm going to speak a little faster with him if that comprehension level is there, because our end goal, once this student has progressed all the way through L4, and if 𝐂𝐶𝐄𝐑 adds on more levels, our goal is to have this student speaking as closely to a native as possible. So that means if the student can understand, you want to push them and stretch them as far as you can without making them frustrated. So speak quicker or speak slower depending on the student. Checks for understanding. This is crucial. So when we're looking at the lessons that 𝐂𝐶𝐄𝐑 has designed for us, we have the high frequency words, we have the high frequency words, we have the vocabulary words, we have the letters that the students are going to be learning. All of this is given to us on that very first 𝐂𝐶𝐄𝐑 curriculum page that's in the lesson. Now, it's very important when you start to deliver a lesson that planning happens. So look at this, understand what it is, and go through, and in order to make checks for understanding, you need to make a list or write down something so that you are able to identify any possible misconceptions that the student can have. That could be something as simple as teaching stove and oven. Well, there are a lot of extension questions and ways to check for understanding to see if the student understands what is the stove and what is the oven. So, for example, one of the things that I think of, I actually make these maps, mind maps, and I will put the target word right here, and then on each one of these other branches I will go through and I'll write any language that could go there or any misconceptions that can happen. So specifically, if we're talking about stove and oven, one way to check for understanding is to show a picture of that and say, where is the stove, where is the oven? And that also allows you to extend a little bit and start teaching the student some other language that is associated with this. Specifically, if you're talking about stove and oven, the first two things that pop in my mind are top and bottom. The stove is on the top, the oven is on the bottom, and you can use some TPR to build that in there. Scaffolding is also very important, so start with the most basic and move up towards the more difficult. Going back to stove and oven, you might say the stove is hot, is the oven hot? And get the student to form very long, complete sentences using that target language and the language that you just taught them, and find ways to build it in through the rest of the lesson. Scaffolding can be done really at any level. For the most basic level, for K1 and K2 students, for me, that includes a lot of STEM questions. And I know everybody's probably thinking science, technology, engineering, math, but I am talking about STEM questions that are related to reading and reading comprehension, specifically ESL STEM questions. So these are going to be questions like who, what, where, when, why, and how. So if you're looking at a lesson, if you're looking at the content of the lesson, and you're going through and you see Jack or Amy somewhere, well, don't just say, where are they? You might ask the student, who is doing this, or who is going there? What are they doing? How are they doing it? How do you know they are doing it? I often do this with the younger students, specifically when we're talking with colors and stuff, because you can use it and you can say, how does this person feel? Are they happy? Are they sad? Look at their face. All of this is different language that you can use to increase the extension, the scaffolding, and check for understanding. All of this leads to checks for understanding, but you aren't able to do the checks for understanding unless you sit down and you plan how you're going to do those checks for understanding. It doesn't have to be a very long lesson plan like working in a brick and mortar school, but you cannot go into the lesson not having previewed it or knowing what's on it and be able to deliver a quality lesson that's going to get you quality feedback. And then, of course, reteaching. If the student doesn't understand it, explain it a different way. Make sure the student understands everything. And it's very hard for you to make sure the student understands everything unless you sit down and plan out what the misconceptions for a non-English speaker might be. If you do all of this and deliver a quality lesson plan, the students and their parents are more likely to leave you quality feedback. So let's move away from here. We're gonna go into taking notes. I'm sorry, I clicked the wrong button, but we're going to move into taking notes. So during my lessons, I take many different notes, and I find that the notes are very beneficial when I am writing the parent feedback. So a couple things that I do to help my students, that way I can take notes and write them more quality feedback, is I like to keep a running record for my students. And I know that this is not for everyone. It might not be your teaching style. It doesn't have to be anything really big, but I have a student that I'm working with, and we are working very hard on sentence stems because this student is a K1 baby, and when I got him, he wasn't able to speak very much, but now the lesson is literally like a conversation. He's about to graduate K1 and move into K2, and a running record really helped me. So what do I do with the running record? What I do with the running record is I just use the page that's on the portal, and I click on the student, and where it says notes, I put what that student is having issues with. What do I put in the running record? Well, I always write pronunciation errors. So if I find that the student is consistently saying something incorrectly or making a mouth movement that's incorrect for a sound, I teach them that, but then I also write it down in my notes. That way I can hit on it in the next lesson if the student is still struggling. I also like to put in the notes any misconceptions that the student has from the current lesson. That way I can address them in the next lesson. Misconceptions were just talked about in the quality lesson slide. So you just reverse the video and watch that again if you'd like. So what I also do in the notes after the misconceptions is I write down any techniques that I'm using with the student to help them increase their understanding, pronunciation, and fluency. So if I see that a student is not saying the sound correctly, I'll show them how to make that sound. Put your tongue between your teeth, this, and push some air, hold some paper up so the students can see it moving. That's a technique that you're employing, so make a note of it, and when you are writing the feedback, include that in the feedback. Tell the parents, hey, work on this with your child at home. That way he can do this with more ease and automaticity. So that's how I take notes when I am teaching a lesson. Now, here's the part that most people are going to probably want to hear, and that is how I write the feedback. And I wanted to preface this with the first point. This is from the Washington Post, and it's basically they did a study and they found that China and Malaysia have the most respect for teachers of all countries in the world. And what I want to say with this is when you are writing a feedback report, teachers are highly respected in China. And if you're making a point to the parent to say, hey, I'm doing this and I care about your child's English language learning, they will listen to you. So don't be afraid to ask for that feedback. But please do keep it professional. Many people are telling parents that their pay is based off of our feedback reports. That's not, in my opinion, very professional. It's not something I would do, because if you do a good job and you are doing everything that you should be doing, the parents are more likely to give you that feedback report. So instead of coming at it a little defensive, be open about it. Say, hey, I really appreciate your feedback. Don't tell them it's for pay. Tell them that you are asking for feedback because it helps you to become a better teacher and improve your lessons for their student. That's the biggest one for me. That one has gotten me a lot of 5-star reviews and actually written feedback as well. I want to quickly go back here real quick. This is from, I took this screenshot today on the 8th of February, and I have a 4-star evaluation from a student that I had last week. I rewatched the playback and I was a little off of my game, but the parent left me some feedback. She wrote me feedback and said, hey, here's what you need to do to be a 5-star teacher, because I asked her after this 4-star review, I said, what do I need to do? And she told me and I addressed it and it went back up to a 5-star. But how did I do that? I did that through a feedback report. So apart from not being afraid to ask the parents for reviews, I like to think of the feedback not so much as an incentive for pay. I look at it as a platform to talk to the parents. We're not allowed to share any social media with the parents. We're not allowed to share phone numbers, WeChat. We're not allowed to use any of this information. So really the only way that we have to talk to the parents is through feedback. So take time when you're writing your feedback, give the student 4 or 5 minutes and use that feedback as a platform to talk to the parents. Include anything that's in your notes, those techniques that you used in the lesson, anything that you see in the running record. You can say, hey, look, I've noticed the student was struggling with this pronunciation. We've worked on it. He seems to have it now. If the student didn't understand something from the previous lesson, that's a misconception. put that in the feedback report. Tell the parent how you're helping them to clear up this misconception that they're having. Personalize your feedback. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. There's, in my opinion, no issue with using Feedback Panda. I did used to use Feedback Panda, but I used the template very loosely. I never copied and pasted directly what was in there because that's not how my students are and that's not how my lessons are. If I see a student is more deficient in pronunciation, I'm going to focus a little more on pronunciation with that student versus comprehension. If I see that the student has great comprehension but cannot speak or express himself very quick, very well, I am going to focus on fluency with that student. And using pre-made feedback that another teacher wrote is not going to yield a 5-star review in most cases. You do need to make it personalized, and you do need to show the parent in that feedback that you are, you're very interested in helping their student learn the English language and be better at it. You're trying to help them understand and speak more like a native. So you really need to put that into the feedback instead of just using a pre-written feedback from someone. You can just change a couple sentences in there and say, hey, I've noticed this, blah, blah, blah. The rest is all great. But it does need to be a little bit more feedback. The feedback does need to be a little bit more personalized, and you do need to let the parents know what you're doing with their child to help them progress. And one more thing, for getting quality feedback and getting reviews, I recommend telling the parents to go through and watch those recorded lessons if they have any errors, any doubts at home. If you've done everything that you should to deliver a quality lesson, if you've done your checks for understanding, if you've extended, if you've scaffolded the lesson to help students who need to be stretched a little more, or made it a little simpler for students that need to be a little more simple, and retaught the information that they're not understanding, then the student should be able, after they receive your feedback report with all of your teaching notes, they should be able to go in to their recorded lesson and see everything that you've written out for them to do. They should be able to see the techniques, all the notes that the parents should be able to see when they read that feedback report, how you got the student from point A to point B. And don't be afraid to tell them in that feedback report to watch that recorded lesson. Because if you've delivered a quality lesson, the parents should have no other questions from you. The student should understand almost everything in that lesson by the time you leave. And if they can't, you should still be able to show in that 25 minutes with their student that you've helped them understand everything. But the only way you can do it is if you are writing quality feedback and actually planning misconceptions and reteaching those misconceptions in the lessons. I hope that if some of you guys decide to implement some of the things that I do, that you are able to get enough feedback to get you at an incentive level 5. And feel free to let me know in the comments if there is anything else you do, because I'm always looking to improve myself, and I'm not the best teacher. Nobody is better than anyone at this job. It's collaborative. We have to work together. So if anybody has any other tips or tricks or anything that I can do to maybe get mine above a 50%, please let me know with a comment. Comment on the video and let me know what you think. Thank you so much, and I hope this video can help you guys. And I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.